You're listening to Big World Network.
Accidental Passion, Episode 11, Intentionally Accidental, read by Meagan Hedin. Warning: although there is no material subject matter within that couldn't be found in any general bookstore with no age constraint, this series is rated 18 and contains adult situations and content. It is intended for mature audiences only and should not be read if you are uncomfortable with graphic sexual intimacy. Woods had spent the morning in the Detroit Detective Squad room presenting evidence to Detective Reynolds, who had been involved with the case when he had shot Rick while trying to protect Kim. Woods liked the younger man, and despite his age, he wasn't overly cocky considering how early in his career he must have made detective. Part of the reason he had made detective so early, Woods surmised, was because the man had gone to law school, although he said he had never taken the board's exams. It was his knowledge of the law, however, that was preventing Detective Reynolds from presenting Woods' evidence to the DA. There just isn't enough to go on here. It's all circumstantial. And although you and I can both clearly surmise that Rick was behind tampering with the jet, there just isn't enough evidence. The video would probably not even be allowed in court, and even if it was, it would be hard to link him to the jet on the video alone, since it was not in camera view. You're kidding, Woods said. I've made cases with less evidence than this in L.A. Well, there's also another issue. What's that? Woods asked. Your friend's famous, and the incident with his jet has gotten a lot of press coverage, Detective Reynolds stated flatly. I don't see what that has to do with anything, Woods replied, a little agitated. And neither do I, but we are working stiffs in the trenches. The DA isn't going to put himself in the public spotlight with a media case unless winning that case is 100% certainty. It's politics, my friend, and I'm sure you've had to deal with that as well in L.A. Detective Reynolds sat back in his wooden desk chair, which made a loud squeaking noise in the busy room. I guess it's the same story everywhere, just different players. But there has to be something we can do. This girl's life is in danger, not to mention Ryan's and anyone else that may come into contact with her. He is truly dangerous, Woods retorted. The detective leaned forward again in his chair. There is something we can do. We have more than enough with a text message to hold him for violating his parole and restraining order, at least enough to pick him up and hold him, not to mention getting a warrant for his phone records. I will have him off the streets by this afternoon. Then we can see what we can do about building a case for tampering with the jet. Woods stood and politely offered his hand. I guess it's a start. I can't thank you enough for helping me. Detective Reynolds stood, taking Woods' hand and shaking it firmly. It's the job. Besides, I'm hoping for an autograph from our author himself for my girlfriend. She loves the guy. I'm sure I can arrange that, Woods laughed. Thanks again. Kevin looked at his watch as he climbed out of his Porsche. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and he took a moment to look around at his workout friend's landscaping. They both had similar incomes, with Kevin being a dentist and Scott a doctor, but their homes definitely were not the same. Scott had an incredible house with a massive, green front lawn, with a tree-lined oval driveway that ran under a large columned overhang at the front of the house, which Kevin had parked under. Their friendship had continued to grow, and the incident in the locker room had never been discussed between the two. Kevin assumed that they had just been overly pumped up from the workout, and forced himself to try not to think about it as much as he wanted to, and nothing similar had happened since. He turned away from the lawn towards the large front door and walked the few steps to it. Scott had told him to let himself in at 3 p.m., and he would be ready to leave for their planned run. It wasn't uncommon for Kevin to let himself into his friend's house, and he did so now. Once inside, he felt the chill of the air conditioning since he was wearing only a t-shirt and running shorts, but it felt good in his body given the abnormally warm Detroit day. Looking around the foyer, Kevin couldn't help but admire it despite having been inside many times in the past. The ceiling was a good 30 feet high with a large skylight at the top. Either side led to a hallway, and in front of him was a grand stairway that had a gentle curve and ended at the top to an open round hallway lined with wooden rails overlooking the foyer. It truly was impressive. Hey, slacker, you ready for our run? Kevin called out. Thinking he heard a reply from upstairs, he bounded up the curved stairway with his running shoes, skipping every other step, and reached the top hall in no time. Again hearing a voice, he turned to his right and walked the several feet to an open door to what he knew to be the master bedroom. The door was completely open and, looking inside, Kevin stopped dead in his tracks at the sight before him. Scott was naked, on top of his wife, also naked, who was on her back oriented upside down on the bed with her feet towards the headboard and head towards the door. She would be unable to see Kevin at the doorway unless she sat up and looked around behind her. They were clearly making love. Kevin was frozen at the sight of his friend's naked hind end moving up and down with his thrusting into his wife. His wife's head was turned to the opposite side of the room, and Scott was holding his upper body above hers with his arms locked straight and his back arched back towards his hips as he looked down at her. Kevin knew he should back away from the door and divert his gaze, but he found himself immobile, almost in a trance at the sight of flesh and intimate sex, obviously building to a climax. The best he could do was move a few inches to the edge of the open door so that, if he needed to, he could rapidly duck behind the wall for cover, although he figured it was unlikely either would notice him now and look his way considering their level of activity. The pace was quickening, and Scott's wife, although not as hot as Kim in Kevin's opinion, was still pretty damn sexy and was making small little guttural sounds as her breast shook with each thrust. Seeing his friend's body naked like that, on top of his wife, was so unexpected. Kevin looked at him, fit and sweaty from the sex, slightly red in the face. Given Scott's arched position holding his upper body up, Kevin could actually make out Scott's cock sliding in and out of his wife, and hear their flesh impacting as he penetrated her completely with each downward thrust. Kevin felt himself grow hard in his shorts, becoming fully erect as he stared at the couple, unable to look away. He couldn't help but slide his hand down the top of his shorts and grab hold of his member, squeezing it, aching for relief, while continuing to watch. He surprised himself by even considering stroking before immediately ruling the idea out. As it became clear both were close to climaxing with his friend's wife's hips arcing off the bed to meet each thrust, and Scott's pace quickening with his long, slow groans, Kevin, despite the inappropriateness of his voyeurism, was completely and totally fixated on the sight. As he watched his friend reach the beginning stages of orgasm, without warning, Scott raised his head and locked eyes directly on Kevin. There was no chance for him to duck out of the way, so he didn't even bother moving. Not that he could if he wanted to. With Scott's eyes still fixed on his own, Kevin remembered where his hand was and removed it from his cock over his shorts, while meeting Scott's gaze. As he climaxed, Scott continued to lock eyes with Kevin, creating a completely unexpected feeling for him. Here was Kevin's friend in a completely intimate moment with his wife, yet his eyes were locked on Kevin's as he came. As their pace slowed and Scott finally broke eye contact and looked down at his wife with a very small start of a smile, Kevin slipped out of the doorway and made his way back down to the foyer, his mind racing. Had his friend staged this entire thing? If he had, the show certainly hadn't disappointed him. This had definitely added a new element to their friendship.
This has been a presentation of Big World Network. Visit us on bigworldnetwork.com for more free weekly series, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.